Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com and the Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days course created by myself and the lovely Katie Dozier. And today we have day 2, which is on aggression, which we call the key ingredient to winning play, because that is something that all good players have in common. They are aggressive players and they know when to use aggression as part of their toolbox, and that's what we're going to look at today. So let's begin with what is aggression, and it might seem kind of obvious, but colloquially people talk about aggression in a slightly different way than what it actually means. So technically aggression is the ratio of bets and raises to calls. So let's go through every possible action you can take in poker. Number 1, you can check. This is not aggressive, it's not passive. Similarly, folding is not aggressive and it's not passive. The only passive action is calling, and the only aggressive actions are betting and raising. So a lot of people, when they're talking about aggression, they use it kind of as a synonym to loose. So he's a really aggressive player means like, yeah, he's betting and raising, but mainly just he's a very loose player. He's getting involved in a lot of pots. And technically speaking, you could be very tight and also very aggressive if you were mainly betting and raising instead of calling. So that is what we're going to mean by aggressive. And it's important to know when you should be both passive and aggressive. So there are times when you should just call, when you're incorrect to raise, and we'll talk about a lot of those spots. But just to give you guys a sneak peek, one such example is, let's say that our opponent bets the river and we think he's bluffing a lot, we beat his bluffs. There's often no reason to raise, and what you're correct to do is just to call, and you beat a ton of his bluffs and you shouldn't raise. So passivity can be the correct play without a doubt. But if you're unsure, take the aggressive approach, because aggression is just the key ingredient of winning poker. So we said this a couple times, and let's answer now the question of why. So we talk about this in the book, but the biggest reason is your opponent can fold and you win immediately. This is a tremendous outcome for us. There's always money in the middle, and usually both players have equity. Okay, we haven't talked much about equity, but what that means is that both players, or if there are 5 players in the pot, everyone has some claim to it. Everyone has some kind of draw that they can hit. And so if we are aggressive and our opponents fold, that means that we get all of the pot. And that is an amazing outcome and the single biggest reason to play poker aggressively. Next, you control both the action and the pot size. If you're playing passively, your opponent's the one who decides how big every bet should be in no limit hold'em, and when bets go in and when they don't, and you're just kind of along for the ride. And some of the time that's okay, some of the time that's a good trade-off. But when you're the one who's making those bets and raises, you decide on the sizing, you decide which betting rounds there's going to be a bet that goes into the pot. So this is a really nice second benefit of aggression. Next, you can go after more value, because the thing is that let's say that you're a very passive player, then people are going to know if you suddenly bet big that you're likely to have a very strong hand. Whereas if you're always in there, you're fighting, you're being aggressive, then you're more likely to get paid when you have a big hand. And this also ties into tightness versus looseness. So looser players are more likely to get action. We'll talk about that in the future. But aggression is key because it allows you to bet more and get more value. And the last benefit we're going to talk about right now is a simple one. You are much tougher to play against if you are aggressive. And think about opponents that you've gone up against in the past. Is it easier to play against the ones who are passive and are mainly going to be calling your bets, or the aggressive ones and you bet and they're check raising you and they're raising you in the river, and they're always forcing you to react to what they're doing? So if something is tough to play against, that means that it's a good strategy to have yourself. And that's actually an idea we're going to talk about in a lot of different contexts, which is inverting the question. So what do we not want our opponents to do? And if there's something that we don't want our opponents to do, then that's a pretty sweet approach to have ourselves. So that's a really nice benefit of aggression. Now, with that said, why don't we take a look at a couple of examples of aggressive play in action. And what we have here is 3 hands loaded up, all showing aggressive play, and they're going to make a few important points. So let's go back to our knowledge of positions. This guy is, of course, UTG +1. Action is on hero, and we're going to play this ace-queen, but the question is, should we call or should we raise? Answer, we should definitely raise, and there are several important reasons for making this aggressive play. First one is that we usually have the best hand here with ace-queen, so we put more money in the pot when we're ahead. We're going to charge the remaining players who have hands like 8-7 suited or whatever they want to take a flop with, and they're getting good odds to do that if we just call behind. But we don't want to encourage them to do that cheaply when they have position against us, so we can raise and knock them out of the pot. We can also win the current pot immediately, and that's a fine outcome. There are 290 chips just sitting in the middle. Anything can happen after the flop. If we win right away, that's a totally legit outcome. That's great. And then we can also win a big pot when we connect with a top pair hand, and that's going to be a lot tougher when we just limp behind, keeping the size of the pot very small. So I'd like to see Hero put in a raise here. That's exactly what he does. He's just about 4 big blinds, which is good sizing. And he stays aggressive. He bets here. If he checked back, that would be, of course, a neutral action. But he bets. He gives up. So folding another neutral action here. And that's fine. We're not always going to win when we're playing aggressively. But this is a good line. We don't have to bet this flop. But the important thing is that Hero played this hand aggressively, gives himself a shot to win both pre-flop and at the flop. And that's a good approach. So the next hand we're going to look at is here with 10-9 suited. This is going to be in a spin and go, jackpot style format. So only 3 players. And here he elects to check back. And this is fine. We could also put out a bet here, which would be a continuation bet. We'll talk more about that in a subsequent section. Our opponent bets, we've paired, and Hero now takes a passive action. So this is a decent time to take a passive action. And the reason for that is because if he has a better hand than ours, let's say it's a jack or a king, he's probably not going to fold if we raise here. But if he has a hand that's worse than ours, let's say he has absolutely nothing, then he's probably just going to fold those junky hands if we raise. So as played, this is a fine time to act in a passive way. And now our opponent bets 40. So what do we want to do in this instance? Now I'm going to rephrase that question a little bit. I'm going to ask a different question. What would you guess? Forget what Hero has in this hand. Forget that he is 10-9 suited. When this guy makes a small bet of 40 into 180, what do you think he does not want to happen? Okay, now this is not, we're going to have our separate quiz question like we do at the end of every video. This is not that question, so just think about that. And my answer is he does not want us to put in some gigantic raise. That is not what he wants us to do. This kind of small bet usually means that a player has a little something. Maybe he has a weak jack, some kind of hand like jack 5 suited. So he probably doesn't have nothing. But at the same time, this is usually not going to be strong. So here is basically saying, I don't care about hands. I don't think you have anything. I'm going to take the aggressive play. I want to win these 220 chips, not have to worry about what you have. So this is a strong, aggressive play, takes the pot away. Well done by Hero. And now we get to the final hand of today's video. And the quiz question I'm going to ask you guys. So you want to know the question in advance as you're watching the hand. And it's simply this. On each street, does Hero play passively, aggressively, or neither? So for example, you could say pre-flop passively, flop neither, turn passively, river aggressively, okay? So you have to, for every single street, give an answer of Hero's playing passively, Hero's playing neither, or Hero's playing aggressively. Okay, so watch carefully. Action number 1. So we raise the king jack off. Now I'm just going to talk about this hand in a slightly more normal way. But you guys know your assignment. You know the quiz question. So we open with a 3 big blind raise. Our opponent checks the flop and we check back. he bets out the turn, and we call. He bets out the river, we raise, and he folds. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this line, but first, go ahead, pause this video, and answer on every single street, are we playing passively, aggressively, or neither? Okay, so let's go and do the correct answers. And I think most of you guys are going to get this one correct. Pretty straightforward, but it is important. And like I said earlier in the PowerPoint, it's easy to use these terms a little bit, at least not occurring the technical way, by just meaning aggression to be loose, passive to be more tight, when these terms do have specific meanings. So pre-flop, aggressive. Flop is neither. Okay, so if he faced a bet and call, that'll be passive. If you bet, that'll be aggressive. But checking back, you might be inclined to say this seems passive, but it's not. It's not passive, it's not aggressive. Turn, passive, and river, aggressive. So again, the correct answers were aggressive pre-flop, neither flop, passive turn, and aggressive river. If you got those right, then congratulations, you have been watching carefully, and you are ready to move on to day 3. So as a last thing, let's just briefly talk about the strategy. And the reason why I'm going to do that is because we're going to talk about most of these concepts in a lot more detail, but while we're seeing them, we want to observe a little bit in advance. So King-Jack offsuit is definitely a good hand to raise. Here in the hijack, we're only going to be raising hands that we play. This is completely correct. Betting this flop would be okay, but here is checking back because he doesn't want to play a large pot. He's not too worried about getting drawn out on. So that's the basic idea behind the check back. And at the turn when our opponent bets, it's kind of similar to the 10-9 suited spot, where if we raise, it's difficult for our opponent to put a lot of money in the hand when we have the best hand. So for the most part, if we raise, we're only going to get action from the strong hands in his range. So by calling, we allow him to continue bluffing when he is bluffing. And here at the river, let's talk about this raise for a second. And the first thing I want to say is that I actually think the passive action will be completely fine here. We've shown some weakness by checking back the flop. So I think calling this bet would be completely fine. But what's going through Hero's mind is largely that it's very difficult for our opponent to have the best possible hand, the nuts. Because if he had ace-king, he's usually going to re-raise pre-flop. We hold a king, so that makes it more difficult for him to have either ace-king or king-9 as well. And so Hero thinks that he can get a hand as strong as a queen to fold. So he is raising here as a bluff. And again, we'll talk about that in more detail later. But at the river, a passive action also would have been completely fine. Either way, though, Hero wins this pot and takes a nice line in the process. All right, so don't worry if you don't quite understand what the idea is behind this river raise. Key thing here is you're familiar with passivity, with aggression, what constitutes both, and why you should play aggressive poker as a default. So we're going to be moving on to more awesome concepts in the coming days, but that's going to end this particular video, day 2 of aggression. So thanks very much for watching. This has been Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com.